Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS live stream for the RSM Classic. It's our last chance to get some DFS action in before we head to the break before next season. So let's make it count. Let's go out there, find our name towards the top of those leaderboards, and have ourselves a heck of a time at it. So here in this live stream, if you have any questions regarding DFS, props, the tournament in general this week, feel free to go ahead and let me know down in the comments. And other than that, we'll go through pretty much everything you need to know. A look at the weather. We'll talk about the golf course a little bit, some of the different strategies for DFS and the prop boards to help you out along the way. But again, any questions that you have, whether it's live or even watching this on replay, go ahead and let me know down in the comments or in live chat. So it started off with a look at the weather, which is typically a pretty decent, place to start, right? Especially with a golf course that is so susceptible to weather changes. So we're going to take a look at some of the round one and round two stats over the last 3 or 4 years, because there's going to be a lot of talk, right? Whether stacking players from one course or the other can be advantageous. The short answer, the Spark Notes answer, is yes, there can be an advantage. But the long answer, the part that we're going to get to here, is that it's often really hard to predict. So we'll go through some of the averages. We'll show you some of the splits that have existed over the sample size there, and I'll let you make up your own mind with what you want to do. I'll give you my strategy, but it's a tough one. We'll talk about it at the end. So first off, for last year's action, round one played, I would say, a little bit harder than round two, but the winds weren't all that crazy. The winds were, I think, the 10 to 15 mile an hour range. They weren't like in the 30 to 40 mile an hour range. The scoring average played over par. You can see for the Seaside course last year, played 0.43 over par there on Thursday, whereas the Plantation course still played healthily under par, right? Was 1.79 under par, whereas in day two, right, day two was much easier. There was much lower winds when it came to the sustained and the wind gusts out there. And both courses played pretty easy, right? It was about 1.3 under for the Seaside course, whereas the Plantation course played about 1.6 shots easier than that, right? They're at 2.7 under par. What we want to note here is that the difference for the Seaside course was much larger, right, than the difference of what you had for the Plantation course. The Plantation course got about a stroke easier, right, under the easier conditions, whereas the Seaside course got a whole 1.7 shots easier. So if you were somebody who started on the Plantation course and then finished, right, going over to the Seaside course, your effective scoring average was 3 under par, whereas for the other side of the draw, where I've heard a few people tout about it this week, right, I guess they didn't look at the last year's stats. The other side of the draw, right, played to a minus 2.2 average. So it was about a 0.8 stroke difference, right, between the two waves last year. So if you were to go out there, have only played guys started on the the Plantation course last year, you not only had that 0.8 shot difference, but if you look at the cut makers, right, the made cut percentage, it was a solid 8% higher for that wave. So there's not going to be a sort of tee time stack that we can go about because they have the two courses in rotation. You're going to have all the tee times within a 2-hour spread. But if you're going to stack one course or the other, it definitely worked last year. But before we get ahead of ourselves, just say that with nasty conditions, that the Plantation course, right, is probably where you want to be. Let's take a look at 2022. So back in 2022, we had a very similar situation, I would say, where one round was significantly easier than the other. In round one, there was pretty much no wind out there. Played 0.36 under par on the Seaside course. Actually played easier than the Plantation. You can see it played about 0.3 shots easier. Whereas on the harder day, right, the Plantation course played over par. So did the Seaside course. So if we go out there and look at the effective scoring averages, if you started on the Plantation course, your effective scoring average was 2.4 under par. And if you started on the Seaside course, your scoring average was 3 under par, right? So in this case, right, when you had one bad day and one good day, it played in the same kind of advantage, right? Because if we go back to 2023, the harder scoring conditions, right, were for round one, as opposed to, in this case, it was for round two. So that lines up with our narrative. But 2011, it's either 2011 or 2010, it gets completely flipped on its head. So let's take a look at 2021. So 2021, you can see it played a little bit harder in round one than it did in round two. If you started on the Plantation course, right, in the harder conditions, you had a scoring average in round one of 0.6 over par. So this is where the trend gets bucked, right? This year, right, the harder round, the plantation course played significantly harder than the seaside course. That's not something that we've seen the last 2 years, but it's worth noting in 2021 that this entire script was flipped on its head. So I remember this because I was somebody that was playing the advantage that we've seen the last 2 years. Because if we go back to 2020, this script returns, right? If you go through the scoring averages there for 2020, you'll see that once again, right, on the harder day, you wanted to be on the plantation course. But for whatever reason, right, this 2021 sample, it could have been pin locations, which they don't change from round 1 to round 2. It's worth noting that, right, they don't change the course setup to try and make it as fair as possible. Maybe the plantation course was just set up like immeasurably hard, right? Like the wind directions just made the pin locations harder than they probably should have been. Outside of that, there's not much of an explanation for what happened there. So my advice, because when we take a look at the weather situation, it's going to look pretty nasty for both days, is to maybe just blindly stack one course or the other, right? I would say that the plantation course, right, would be the easier of the two tracks. But when we look at the weather, right, Thursday looks pretty shitty, right? It's rainy for most of the day, extremely high winds. It's why I'm showing up there on Friday, going up to St. Simon's Island, but only going to go there for rounds 2 through 4. A lot of that because of tomorrow's weather forecast. So we'll take a look at a few of the different forecasts, like HRRR, for example, is calling for slightly lower winds than what we had there with the ECM model there at first, but still pretty nasty conditions. Going to rain there in the afternoon. That's sub-ideal. And then if we take a look at the NAM model and skip over there to Friday, it's even worse conditions, right? So if I was reading this weather situation right now, and let's take a look at the icon model. I like looking at that for Friday's conditions. They're also predicting actually even worse conditions right out there for the second round action. Not so much from the weather, right? There's not going to be rain out there. It's the wind gusts, right? Getting to 31 to 35 miles an hour. They're going to be extremely dicey for those players. So if there's going to be a day to be on the plantation, this is just based on 3 of the last 4 years, right? Favoring the plantation course. I think on Friday, one guy's on plantation, right? Because if you're going to get 35 mile an hour winds, I can just tell you, as somebody that's been to this course before, right, that has experience watching golf tournaments here, was it 2 times at this point? It is really exposed on the seaside. Like it's holes 10 through 14 are completely in the wide open. There's nothing to protect you from the wind. There's a few mangrove trees on hole 10 to the left, but especially holes like 11 through 14, you're absolutely screwed if there's going to be a huge wind out there. Whereas the plantation course, a little bit more inland, you have some trees over on that side of the property. I think that's why you've seen 3 of the 4 last years favor that. The reason why I want to give you this huge disclaimer and why we went through these stats here, though, is that 2011 completely flips that on its head. So I wouldn't dive into it too much. You could even go out there and stack the other wave and try and find an advantage that way, because 2021 is a perfect example of that, right? This advantage that we could potentially see out there isn't really as straightforward as some would expect, or at least hope for. So in my lineups this week, to give you the synopsis, I'm going to be taking 25% of my lineups and making sure that they're players starting on seaside, right? Because if the wind conditions on Friday are going to be nasty, if they're going to be in the 30 to 35 mile an hour range, well, I want my guys playing the inland course, right? The one that's a little bit more protected. I'm also going to take 15% of my lineups, right? So that's 25%. I'm going to play 6-0, right? Only guys starting on the seaside course. I'm also going to take 15% and only take guys that are starting on the plantation course. Maybe with that rain tomorrow, right? You want to be on the inland, more protected golf course. It's also a more scoreable golf course, right? So maybe on the easier day, right? You want to be on the easier golf course and maybe ends up playing to that wave, right? We've seen it go both ways. I'm just not very confident in one weather edge versus the other. So personally, I think you're going to see an edge, right? It's going to favor one of the 2 golf courses. I just think it's a crapshoot guessing which one it's going to be, especially because the weather is so shitty for both 2 days. And anytime you have storms coming through, I mean, there might be a stoppage in play. There's been a ton of rain down here, huge tropical storm going through the Gulf. So you've seen Florida over my way getting a lot of precipitation, but also up there in St. Simon's, Georgia. It's not that far away, right? It's like 4 hours up the road by car, maybe 4.5. They're also getting pounded by rain. If they get any sustained rain tomorrow morning, like they're calling for 4 or 5 hours straight of rain, they might have to stop play, right? There's a reason why they're starting at 8 a.m. They know that they're going to have a hard time getting all the play in tomorrow, that there might be a delay in play potentially. And if that ends up happening, right, that could throw off everything, right? If they end up calling play for all of the day tomorrow, there are some forecasts, right? Like the ECM model, for example, they're calling for rain literally all day. I mean, who knows, right? We've seen crazier stuff happen. This whole weather edge could be flown, completely flipped, right? If that were to happen, then they might be playing round 2 on Saturday. And knowing my track record with showing up the golf tournaments, I tend to bring a lot of bad luck when it comes to the weather, a lot of delays at a lot of the events I've gone to. If that happens, right, then the other wave is the one you have to have. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to tell you to, take one wave or the other, but just know that there's probably going to be an advantage. So that's why I'm taking half of my lineups and completely correlating them in that fashion, right? The other half, I'm going to probably be taking like a lot of 3-3s, maybe 4-2s, right, in either direction. But at least for half of my GPP exposure, I want to be trying to attack that kind of correlation. So that's the weather talk. It's a little complicated, right, because we have 2 golf courses. Also a pretty complicated weather situation, I would add on top of that. But in general, just take advantage of correlation, right? Especially if you're playing a lot of lineups. Like if you're somebody that's playing 1-2 lineups, maybe don't worry about the weather as much, right? You can pick a course, maybe favorite if you want to. Honestly, if I was going with 1-2 lineups, I probably wouldn't worry about that all that much. It's more so for the people that have a larger portfolio of lineups, right? I'm talking about like 150 maxers, even 20 maxers to 50 maxers. You want to be taking advantage of this. It's just, it could be a stroke and a half advantage. And if it ends up playing out in your favor, could be a huge way to get towards the top of the board. So that's how I'm handling the weather. Now let's talk about ownership, which I'm going to have on the spreadsheet for this week. And we'll go through a few player notes as well. So if there's any specific questions on players, let me know. We'll talk about some of my outright bets too, because that's something that I'm starting to incorporate into my content. It's going to be something I'm starting to incorporate into the Patreon here soon as well. Down here in Florida, Hard Rock Bet was made legal down here, and they have pretty decent odds. They're not perfect. They don't have the best odds compared to all the books out there. But if you shop your odds, you take a look at the boards, they're often the industry leader in some of the categories, especially with the matchup markets. They've had a few really solid matchup numbers out there. I took Eric Cole in round 1, even money. He's in a group with, it's a 3-ball, by the way, because they're in threesomes, right? The first 2 days. He's in a 3-ball with Greg Chalmers, and I think it's like Kevin Chappell or something like that. And he was even money at that sort of projection. I hammered that. So we'll talk about some of the different bets that you might want to consider with players. But a lot of it for me, right, is going to be seen through the Hard Rock Bet thing. Because down here in Florida, it's a monopoly. It's a legal monopoly at this point when it comes to sports betting. It's great that we have it down here, but it's not great how it's structured. They're the only operator that's allowed to run because of a long-standing agreement with the state, where they're able to run pretty much all the gambling down here in Florida, the Seminole tribe that is. And they're the only ones that are offering odds. But luckily to this point, that's why I mentioned the odds being decent. They've been posting pretty decent odds, right? So they're not like the only operator and then putting a ton of VIG on every single bet out there. They're doing a pretty good job about it, which is good to see. So up top, you've got an elite tier up here where ownership is condensing on three main guys up here, and an Aberg, a Harmon, and a Henley. With Harmon and Henley, you have the hometown kind of narrative. Both of them have properties on the island, live here for a good amount of the year. Henley, I believe, doesn't actually live there the full time. Harmon does, right? When he's not playing golf, Ryan Harmon, at least to my knowledge, is at Sea Island most of the time. Of course, I'm sure he travels quite a bit. Golfers in the offseason aren't home all that much, but plays Sea Island, a lot of the courses on St. Simon's Island all the time out there, and is one of the hometown favorites. So he's going to have a lot of the crowd behind him. A lot of people are playing him in DFS because of that. He has decent finishes here, right? I believe hasn't won this golf tournament. I might be wrong about that. Don't quote me on it, but T2 last year made the cut 4 of the last 5 years. If you take a look at shots gained at this golf course, is top 5 in that category. And though he hasn't played much at all, I think that's the one real question mark with Brian Harmon. He's undoubtedly one of the better players in this field, one of the better course fits, one of the better course histories that we have in this field. The real question mark is whether you're willing to play somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of form. So Brian Harman to me is one of the better course fits in terms of like projection, right? If you're somebody that looks at course fit and takes that real seriously, is probably towards the top of your leaderboard. So in my exposure, he's in my player pool, just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of my exposure. And in terms of percentage owned, I believe as of my last run, he was my highest owned player. When it came to my player pool. And a lot of that is because he's a 10K player, right? You have to take a lot more of those guys to get leverage to the field, but still guys I think are decent plays when it's all said and done. Cameron Young's essentially unowned, right? 12.3%. That is a steal, especially considering that he did top 30 finish his first time playing here. So it was back there in 2011. It was a T29 finish. So obviously nothing to really tout about when it comes to performance, but still respectable, has a little bit of experience around here, right? Made the cut at a course that doesn't fit his game. So though I'm not personally taking the leap on Cameron Young, I do think he's intriguing from the differentiation perspective. Aberg's always going to get his lick, right? People love playing him. How couldn't you with how he's been playing for his career so far? So 23%, not surprising at all to see that kind of ownership. Just know that if you're going to play Aberg, you're eating some chalk up top, and that if you want to get leverage to the field, which I don't think you have to get a bunch, right? Like you don't have to win your GPP up here with your plays up top, right? That middle tier, the 8K, that 6K range, there are plenty of spots to get leverage to the field on. But up top, right, if you're going to try and get leverage to Aberg, if you're going to try and make him a spot where you're gaining on the field, right, you're going to have to play him in like half your lineups. So personally, I'm not playing Aberg this week. If I was, I'd probably play him in like a third of my lineups, right? I wouldn't be out there trying to play him in half my lineups in PGA DFS. It's just much too volatile a format. And the reason why I mentioned that is I feel like a lot of people say otherwise, right? That's just a personal strategy of mine. It's one that I know a lot of other top tier 150 maxers will do themselves, especially some of the pro players that don't just play PGA DFS. A lot of the guys that are, kind of just entering every sport, there's quite a few of them out there, right? That probably don't even watch golf, right? That play a lot of PGA DFS. A lot of those players, honestly, some of the highest DV players, by the way, are the ones that are doing this, are the ones that aren't only taking 2x on players. So for example, right, they'll take 33% of an Aberg, right? Like 1.5x out there for a player, but they'll also take like half of a player. So like, let's say somebody's like 15% owned, they'll play him at 7%. I won't do that. To me, it's not worth it, right? If I'm going to have 7% of a player and have them in like 10 lineups, it's like, why even play at that point? You're just hoping to get the right combination out there, but there are a lot of top tier players that do that. So I don't want to completely shit on that strategy. I just want to throw that out there because some people ask me how to handle the top of the board, right? So many people will say like, oh, I love everyone up there, right? I'm going to play everyone up there in the 10K range. You can do that. That's a strategy you can take, right? You can play everyone up there from like 9K plus and just make the rest of your player pool really condensed, right? Try and leverage that 8K range, take some low-end players and, take them in 40% of your lineups, right? You're going to have to be uncomfortable with at least one part of your player pool. But if there's a part that you just have to punt, which I'm not doing this week, but if you needed to, you can do it. It's especially up there in the 10K range. It's a strategy I've taken before, right? When it was the Mexico Open, it was Jon Rahm and Tony Finau. I took one or the other in every single lineup. I think I had like negative leverage on Jon Rahm, ever so slight leverage on a Tony Finau out there, and ended up taking down a GPP that week. So it's a strategy that's worked for me in the past. So don't feel like you have to avoid that. And it is worth noting, guys, if you're going to take chalky plays up top, right, just because you're not getting leverage to the field doesn't mean you can ignore the ownership, right? So the other half of that equation is if you're taking, let's say, a Brian Harman or a Russell Henley, you're going to have to differentiate at some other spot. They're 22% owned. In single entries, they might even be like 30% owned with those two players in particular, especially Eric Cole. Like single entries, he's going to be 30% plus owned. I can almost guarantee you that tomorrow morning. These sort of guys, especially in a single entry kind of build, if you're taking them together, say you're starting like a Brian Harman, Eric Cole, which I'll have even for some GPP lineups, you're really going to have to think about ownership. Down here in the 8K range, right? You can't be taking a chalky JJ Spawn. You can't be pairing that up with a chalky Taylor Pendrith, right? If you're taking Spawn, Pendrith, and then Harman and Cole as your first four into a lineup, you're going to have next to no chance at getting differentiation. So there's a cost to taking some of these chalky guys up top, but they're not impossible to pull off, right? You just have to differentiate. at one spot. To give you an example, right? Perhaps rather than taking a chalky Taylor Pendrith, right, you go to a Ben Griffin who's half the ownership, right, at 8.6%. Perhaps rather than going up and taking a chalky JJ Spawn, you go, okay, I'll take Chesson Hadley. It was a pretty decent course history in terms of course fit. You know, it was a good putter, a good wedge player like we're looking for. JJ Spawn, great course fit himself, right? That's why he's getting that attention. But if you're taking some of the chalky pieces up top, you're going to have to force that in a little bit. So wanted to point that out. A few chalky pieces to keep an eye on. Adam Svenny, also Denny McCarthy, both getting a little bit of late steam out there based on some of the content that I'm seeing. Taylor Pendrith, like I mentioned before, there at 15% is relatively high owned. Down in the 6K range, there's not much when it comes to chalk. Sam Ryder, Vince Whaley at $7,200 are like 5-6% owned, but even them, right, aren't getting outrageous when it comes to the ownership. Down in the 6K range, there's really nothing to speak of. In terms of chalk, I guess Tyler Duncan is your highest owned player at 3%. But even that, right, it's doable. Play him in 5% of your lineups and you're double the field. So there's no egregious chalk towards the bottom of the board. Most of your chalk this week, there's a one 7K piece of chalk. There's a one real piece of 8K chalk. It's up top, right? It's Eric Cole. It's Russell Henley. It's Brian Harman. It's Ludwig Aberg. You just can't play all four of them, right? In fact, if you're playing 150 lineups, unless you're really differentiating in the 6-7K range, you should probably only play 2 of those 4 players. So I love Eric Cole this week. I told you guys I like Brian Harman. I also have a little liking for Russell Henley. So I've slightly broken that rule myself. So yeah, I do have Russell Henley in my pool. I'll just say that. But at the same time, I am differentiated as hell elsewhere, right? Like down here in the 7K range, I'm taking some nasty plays that are sub 3% owned. Down here in the 6K range even, I mean, there are guys like Jason Duffner, for example, way down here at $6,300 that I'm taking at 0.2% that make those kind of lineups work, right? So if I'm going to be taking a bunch of the chalk up here together, I'm going to be handling it the right way. And one way that I'm avoiding this, so this is something that I'm doing with my set of 150, is that I'm only taking one of these 3 players, right? It's a Harman, that's super chalky, a Henley, an Eric Cole that I'm going with this week. All 3 kind of fit the golf course, right? Aberg, stud player, right? But I think this golf course, courses, I should say, probably not the best collection for a Ludwig Aberg. Whereas these other 3, right, more prototypical of what we're looking for. The rule I'm setting is only playing 1 in every lineup, right? So if I'm starting with a Brian Harman, that means no Eric Cole as a second man in, right? If I'm starting Brian Harman, that means no Russell Henley as a double buyback option, right? So there are other guys up here that I'm taking for differentiation, like a cough, Corey Connors, right? He's only 15% owned. JT Poston looks pretty juicy at that sort of price tag. Down here in the 8K range, right, there are, even Denny at 14%. Like he's kind of chalky, but he's not 23 to 30% owned Eric Cole, right? There are spots to get different to the field. So as long as I'm not taking these super chalky spots together, I feel pretty confident with my player pool being different this week. So that's how I'm handling it. Obviously, there's a chance, right, that Brian Harman and Eric Cole both end up being optimal and I end up kind of like ruling myself out of some of those lineups. It's just, especially because I use a optimizer to build my lineups. If I was, hand building my set of 150, I could probably get away with putting them together than forcing in some super low end players. But I do mine on an optimizer, right? So for single entries, maybe I will have a lineup, right, that starts like Harman, and then an Eric Cole is my second man in. But unless I'm hand building, I'm trying to rule against that. It's too much ownership for me, right? I could see that becoming a problem at some stage of the player pool there. Let's see. So anyone to point out in this 8K range? Svenny's got really good form, really good course history, of course, with the win here last year. I can't really say that he's bad chalk there at 16%. So that's worth noting, right? He's getting some steam, but I don't think it's a bad play. JJ Spawn, on the other hand, I don't get it as much, right? Not the best Bermuda grass putter. Also just not the best form, right? I know he's number 19 in recent form rank, but that's not really worthy of being mega chalk, right? He's played okay over the last few events. His event history also isn't really eye-popping. So if we take a look at that for JJ, right, it's what, 2 top 16 finishes, like that's okay, right, at $8,000. I don't think he's worthy of being twice the ownership as some of the other guys in this range. So I point him out as maybe a piece of bad chalk. Taylor Pendrith, same thing. He's more of a power player off the tee, more of an off the tee gainer, like gains stroke and a half per round when he's playing well. That's not really going to fly around this golf course, especially the Seaside course. It's very tight off the tee, and it forces you to hit a lot of layups, a lot of irons off the tee. Nicholas Lindheim, I know I didn't point him out before, but he's 9.4% owned. That's pretty high when it comes to the ownership. Probably worth pointing out there. And yeah, that's probably it when it comes to the chalk. There are most of your concerns are up there up top, right? With the guys that are like 20 to 25% owned. So let's go through a few lineups together. I want to hop over to Draftkings and talk through some of the lineup construction process, like as we build a lineup, right? You know, it's one thing to talk through it with you guys, right? Show you guys the ownership numbers. It's another thing to actually show you it in practice. So we'll go through that after we talk through a few questions. Anthony Marino says, thoughts on Kuchar, Suh, or Jaeger? So through those top three, Kuchar, decent course fit, right? He's good with the wedges, decent with the mid irons, and a good putter, right? So he checks the course fit box. Suh, a similar player. So everything I just said about Kuchar, you could say about Justin Suh. And then Steven Jaeger, I don't know if I like him as much as the first two. He's not as consistent a putter, right, as those first two players. And then he's more of a long iron player. So if I was in a large field GPP, Marino, and I was looking for differentiation and I had to get different, the answer is Jaeger, right? Because he's the lowest owned out of those three. But unless you're forcing in differentiation, I'd rather have one of those first two. And for me, I'd probably rather have Kuchar because he's a little bit cheaper than Justin Suh. If memory serves me correctly, let's see. Yeah, a little bit cheaper than what you have with Justin Suh. And then you said a question about Alex Noren as well. I think Noren is coming in with good form, and I'm surprised he's not chalkier. That's my take on Alex Noren, right? You know, when somebody's coming in with a bunch of top finishes, has played a lot during the fall swing, fits the predominant narrative that people are going with for the golf course, right? People are looking for putters this week, which is, I think, spot on, right? We kind of know what to expect around this golf course, around the RSM Classic. So Alex Noren only being 14.6% owned, surprising. I'll say that much. Let me check. Do I have exposure as per my last player poll? I have to double check that one. I don't, but I'm thinking about it now. Let's say that much, especially at that kind of ownership number as per my last run. So let's make it through lineups here together. If you have any questions, throw it down in chat. We'll cover any players that you want my take on. But if we're building a lineup here, I'm going to show you what to avoid first, right? So this would be for a large field GPP. Let's say like the big $5, like I'm 150 maxing for this week. What I'm avoiding in my lineups, at least for the rules I'm setting in my optimizer, is this like Harman, what is it, Cole start down here. It puts you at $7,600. It's not the price tags that are prohibitive. It's that with the rest of your lineup, you have to be so different that I don't know if you're building a plus EV lineup. And just to give you an idea here, right? Like down here in the 7K range, you have to like force in a super low owned play. And like the low owned options in this range are ugly, right? It's like a Cam Champ who's like 3% owned. Up here in the 8K range, there's nobody that's 9% or lower owned, right? Everyone's really getting ownership. There's nobody you can really take for differentiation. So, you know, in this 8K range, let's see, I think the lowest owned player, was it like Keith Mitchell or something? Keith Mitchell, I've got it 9.5%. Yeah, we could go Jaeger. Jaeger, I've got it 9.1, but he's a little bit too expensive. Let's go down there and go with Keith Mitchell, right? So if we're starting with those two chalky guys, our only real pivot in the 8K range is a nearly 10% owned Keith Mitchell. Like, are we really getting that different there, right? 10% of the field has Keith Mitchell. Like, it's not really that much of a differentiation spot. We're down to $7,500. Like I said, you could take Cameron Champ for some differentiation, but he's like 3% owned, and that's because he's all off the tee at a golf course where you can't hit driver at. Like, so do we really feel good about taking Cameron Champ as a spot to get different? I know I wouldn't, right? So this is why this type of build kind of sucks, right? Because you're trying to find spots to get different. Like, I mean, you could throw in like a Dietrich, right? Like his ownership isn't all that crazy, but you know, at $7,200, you don't feel good about any of these four players. I mean, like Keith Mitchell, I'm playing this week. I'm okay with Mitchell at this golf course. You don't feel great about the play though, right? I mean, he's an off the tee guy at a course where you can't really hit driver. These last three players are just nasty. Like, I'm okay playing Dietrich, right? I'm playing Dietrich this week as well, but like Cam Champ makes you want to throw up in your mouth. Your last play here, especially if you're getting different, makes you want to throw up in your mouth, because if you're trying to get different, right, you're not taking a Sam Ryder. You're not taking a Vincent Whaley, right, who are coming in with pretty decent form. Your differentiation spot down here is like a Ben Coles, right? It's like a throw up in your mouth sort of play. That's why I'm avoiding that sort of start. If I go up there and I take like a chalky Brian Harman to start, let's say rather than an Eric Cole, I go down here and take, a still pretty chalky player. Let's add Denny McCarthy into here, but he's only 14% owned, right? Now we're still looking for differentiation, but we're not as fixated on it, right? So maybe we still throw Keith Mitchell in there. He's a relatively low-owned player, but down here in the 7K range, we have a lot more freedom, right? If we want to take a Harris English, who's a local, somebody that knows this golf course very well. Also, I think just a player that's mispriced when it comes to his long-term form. You throw him in there at $7,800, right? He's a little bit higher owned than some of the other players, like let's say a Cameron Champ, but you don't have to be as different now, right? Our last two spots, we're going to force in some differentiation. Let's throw in like a Ben Griffin, for example. And then with our last pick, maybe we would even leave like salary on the table, go down here and take like a Mark Hubbard and leave $100 on the table. This kind of lineup is just as different as the other one, right? But you feel a lot better about the lineup. Or like Ben Griffin, right? Core play for me. I like Harris English this week. You could even take out a Keith Mitchell and let's say throw in like a Akshay Bhatia, for example, rather than him. Probably somebody that you feel a little bit more comfortable taking in lineups. And this lineup's probably different enough as well, especially if you're leaving salary on the table. Let's assume you're still taking like a Mark Hubbard as your last man in, leaving that $200 on the table. You're just fine. You can get away with that pretty much in any contest you're entering. So that's why I'm trying to avoid taking like a Harman and a Cole together, especially because this 8K range, there's just no one to get different with. Like it's so flat when it comes to the ownership that you're not going to find somebody and get a ton of leverage to the field that it makes your lineup nasty. Like your 7K players at that point are just complete dog shit punts that you're hoping come through, and they might come through for you, right? But you're going to be throwing darts to the wind and hoping that the shit doesn't fly back in your face is essentially what you're hoping for there. Let's see if they posted any prop boards for golf. They haven't posted them earlier, but look, we got one over there in Underdog. And let me see if we have one on Prize Picks, because it looks like it's strokes only on Underdog, which is pretty predictable. I want to see what they have over on Prize Picks. So they do have a board up. Okay. So Prize Picks and Underdog have boards up. I'm wondering if they have the courses labeled to help us out. It looks like Prize Picks only has Seaside golfers up, at least per their labeling, right? It's only Seaside golfers. Let's see what they have over here on Underdog. So I got to bring up the PGA page as well, because I don't know. Actually, I can just bring up my projections, right? We have the starting courses on there. See, do they have any guys playing on Plantation on there? Okay, let's see. Doesn't look like it, at least per first glance. Let's see, because Russell Henley I know is Seaside for sure. Yeah, Russell Henley is Seaside. It looks like they're only doing Seaside course when it comes to these prop boards. So that's kind of lame. We're only going to get one golf course to bet on. When I get there for Friday through Sunday, I'm only going to be walking the Seaside course. So I guess it's okay, but it's kind of disappointing, right? It'd be nice to be able to bet on the other golf course. Let's see. Harris English, Luke List. Are they Seaside? Pretty sure they are. Let's see. Luke List, Seaside. Harris English, Seaside. That's unfortunate. So yeah, it's going to be everything you see on the prop boards here is going to be for the Seaside course, which let's bring up the data for right now. That's the one that Data Golf covers, right? And has all the detailed stats for where all the shots gained come from. So we can do a little bit of a deep dive here and figure out how to attack these prop boards. The DP World Tour Championship. Yeah, we can talk about that. So we'll do that right now. So I don't have a lot of thoughts, Curtis. So that's why we'll cover it right here real quickly. Haven't done a ton of research on it. I know it's the Tour Championship over there. Really good field. The prop bets for it, I'd probably wait until after round one. See how the golf course is playing, get some averages, so on and so forth. It's not something that I plan on playing for round one, but I do know that after we have the Data Golf data, I'm there for, I guess it's going to be tomorrow night's action. Something to keep an eye on, right? Because the prop board, they have it posted. It's pretty extensive, actually, over there in Prize Picks. They have birdies and strokes up for a lot of the board. 5.5 birdies seems a little high, right? They have Rahm, Rory, and Hovland at 5.5 birdies. They've got guys like Matt Fitzpatrick that don't make a ton of birdies at 5 birdies. I'm just really hesitant to go out there and take fades because this golf course is a relatively easy golf course. It just feels like the pricing is juiced up. Like 5 birdies, 5.5 just seems a little bit too much. From the strokes perspective, right? They have some of these guys projected 4 under par. Just a little bit of a tough scene for me. So if you're talking about from like the prop perspective, not my favorite board to attack right now. But from the outright perspective, I'd be taking a shots in some top 5s. Down here in South Florida, Hard Rock Bet does have them posted. I was looking at the top 5 market before. I was considering like a Ryan Fox top 5. I was considering like some of those DP World Tour standouts, like a Bjork for a top 10, for example, because it feels like a lot of the PGA Tour players are getting too much of the equity. And they're the best players in the world, don't get me wrong, but they haven't played in forever. They're not always used to this style of golf. Like Rory's played the Tour Championship a bunch. Like same thing with Matt Fitzpatrick, Terrell Hatton, right? Like they're used to the golf course, but you have some newer names out there, right? Like a Victor Hovland, for example, that hasn't seen this golf course all that much. It feels like they're giving those kind of players way too much credit. So if I was going to attack anything right now, Curtis, it would be outright's top 5s, top 10s. And I'd be taking just your regular old European Tour players that are coming in with form. Bjork, not really coming in with form. Guys like Fox, a little bit better. So maybe take a look at those guys. In terms of what we're looking at for the PGA side, let's take a look at this golf course round by round. So actually, we've got to go back for that. Let's do that. So round by round last year at the Seaside course, right? It played over par in round 1. That's when you had harder scoring conditions. Rounds 2 through 4, it was really cool out there in terms of temperature, but there wasn't that much wind, right? So you saw 1.3 under par, 1.5, and 1.7 under par. The year before that, you also, why is it bringing that up? All right, well, let me see if I can refresh this because it's definitely not supposed to be bringing that up. All right, there's the RSM Classic. Why is it doing that? All right, let's go to 2022, find these out. So in 2022, what I was trying to find, round 1 played much easier than round 2, played 3.6 under par. We're not going to see that, right? It's going to be blustery out there. It's going to be rainy for a lot of the day out there. It played 0.94 under par, over par the next day. That's probably more in line with what we're going to see. So that's worth noting. 2021, round 1, 0.12 under par. That's probably pretty close to what we're going to see. Maybe it plays slightly over par, but I think probably more likely going to play slightly under, like this 0.12 under. 2020, let's see that. In 2020, played 0.58 under par in round 1. Again, maybe something like that or down to like 0.12 under. Something like that's pretty reasonable. And then back in 2019, 1 over par, and then this 0.15 under. Conditions are pretty shitty tomorrow, I have to say. Like, if we go over here to the HRRR, which is the most accurate 48 hours out, so 24 hours out, also the most accurate, you can see it's like 15 mile an hour sustained winds. That's nothing to scoff at. And then 25 mile an hour wind gusts. You're not going to blow them off the golf course. You're not talking 30, 40 mile an hour winds, but it's definitely not going to play 3 under par like we saw there in 2022. That's for damn sure. You're not going to see that. And then last year, I don't think it's going to play like this 1.3, 1.5, or 1.7 under par because there was no wind out there, right? I mean, 25 mile an hour wind gusts are, especially for like a novice golfer, like somebody like myself, is hard to play in. It's not something that you can get away with. These tour players are going to be affected by that. So when we're taking a look at these prop boards, especially over here with Underdog, I'd probably be looking at some of the fades here, potentially some overs. Let me double check the par of the course. I should know this as I've been there so many times. It's a par 70. I'm 99% sure, but let's double check our work. So GCAA, yeah, par 70. So yeah, we're looking with a par 70. A lot of these guys projected like 2 under. Feels like a little bit too positive in my end, right? The scoring average might be slightly under par, maybe even slightly over par. Having guys like at 2.5 under par on the golf course that's exposed, it feels like a little bit of a mistake. So we'll see what we're working with here in a second. You took Moronk and Hogard at 2,500 for an outright. Perfect kind of players, right? Those guys are being slept on. I think I'd prefer them for a top 5 because Rory and Rahm are in the field. I mean, you could throw Hovland in there too. Like they're just world killers, right? They can go out there and win any event. It feels like from the top 5 and top 10 angle, though, that they're being disrespected, right? Like every time these tour players come over there, like you'll have a Max Homa that goes out there and wins the thing. Then you'll have guys that go over there and completely miss the cut, right? Completely fall on their face. Like the Ned Bake challenge, the no cut event that they had the other week, they had multiple tour players that were over par by the end of the week. It's like, really, at an event where the scoring average was under par. I like them, but I like them even more potentially for like top 5. Like that would scream really good bet for me at this golf course. But Tia's a good fit, you think? I think he's an okay fit, Anthony. I like him at these weaker field events, right? He's somebody that just makes a lot of birdies. He's going to make mistakes, so I wouldn't count on him to win the golf tournament. But at like, what is he, lower 8K range when it comes to the price tag, you're not asking for him to win, right? If we get a top 10 out of Akshay Bhatia, especially given how many birdies that he's making, that's probably enough for the large field GPP to potentially even crack the optimal lineup. So $8,100, it's kind of about the expectations there. Compared to the guys around him, I would say he's probably the best course fit in that range. Like a Luke List to Keith Mitchell are more off the tee specialists. Alex Smalley, JJ Spawn, I think are decent course fits. Bhatia, the same thing, right? Just like okay course fits. And, and when it comes to the ownership, he's the lowest owned of that bunch. Him and Keith Mitchell, right? Are your lowest owned players down there in that range. All right, let's look at this prop board and figure out what we're going to do. So I haven't entered anything yet, right? These prop boards are fresh here. And I'm thinking fades, right? Just my intuition at this point is that even though it's soft out there, you've had a lot of rain over the last few weeks, it's going to be windy. And windy and wet conditions are pretty shitty to play in. So if I was going to take any fades here, like just off the top of my head, like a Chesson Hadley kind of stands out. I'm going to have to double check my projections. Let's see. A Vegas after a win, right? It's anyone at 67.5 strokes feels a little bit too low. Let's double check and see if we have any sportsbook odds to compare to, because we didn't have any as of last check about an hour ago, but something tells me that these prop boards going up probably coincided with the sportsbook odds dropping. So let's double check that. It's usually what happens, by the way. If you're wondering why there's any sort of delay with boards dropping, oftentimes it's because of the sports books. They're waiting to cross-check the odds, make sure they're not pricing a board egregiously wrong. And if I was a betting man, that's probably what's going on. Look at that. Guess who has odds posted that were up about an hour ago? Fanduel. It's like they were just waiting on it, right? Like they do every single week. All right, so they've got Kirk at 69.5. Now, I think this is a plantation course. So let's find guys that we know for sure are playing the Seaside. So they've got Matt Kuchar, we know is on the board at 68.5. It is minus 140 towards the over, right? So if we go over here, look at where you have him on Underdog. Where's Matt Kuchar priced? Lower, right? So he's at 0.5 lower in terms of his projection. And so we're getting a discrepancy there, and we can take the over. The unfortunate part here is, guys, is that we can't take two overs together, right? So, for example, if we wanted to take a JJ Spawn over and pair these two up, you can't even do that. So let's just try and enter a $5 slip on those two. You'll see that because of the correlation rules in Underdog, we can't do so. That's complete horseshit. It's going to make this stuff borderline unplayable. And so the advice for Underdog is going to be to take fades, right? A majority of this board is going to be mispriced. In fact, I'm going to have to make sure we can get off stream here relatively soon so I can try and catch some of that value. But on Underdog, if you're trying to play only like golf plays and trying to take the combinations of golf plays together, it's pretty much impossible. So good luck doing that. My exposure is going to be all probably pairings with like football, some NBA stuff I'm sure I'll get to at some point tonight. But yeah, other than that, I'm not going to be playing much on Underdog. And that's for damn sure. You're just hoping for a top 40 for Bhatia. Hey, if you're playing in a GPP, got to make that a top 10, right? But yeah, if you're playing cash, something like that, top 40 works, right? For sure. I think he's a good course fit for sure. I think he's got top 10 or even winning upside too, Anthony. So good play all around, frankly. All right, let's take a look at this PGA board. So 4.5 birdies seems pretty fair. 4 birdies for lower tier guys does seem pretty fair. Like unders, maybe, but the strokes props are probably where we're finding more value here. So they have Kuchar at the same projection. Let's see. Anyone else? Obviously, Spawn, the same sort of projection. The issue is the payouts, right? I mean, these payouts are going to be utter dog shit for some of the players here. So let's see. Svenny's at 68.5. Oh, they do have green. Oh, okay. All right. This is where I think we're going to find some edge. So we can take these stroke props, right? Let's throw in these 68s. Any even number props I like here, and I'll explain why here in just a second. But greens regulation can also fade some guys here. So let's put Smalley in there. And Luke List, for as good a player he is, not the best at hitting greens regulation stat-wise. So let's see. Let's throw all these guys in here. So the reason why we're taking even number props is look at the payout, right? So the payout for this 6-leg flex, right? It'd normally be like a 25x parlay. They only give you 8x for getting 6 of 6, right? That's complete dog shit, right? If you hit that, and you actually ended up going 6 for 6 and you only got 8x payout, you'd be like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? The reason why you take only even numbered props is if one of these goes out there and pushes on Prize Picks, it defaults to a regular paying out slip. So that means if you only had one push, right, and you went 5 for 5, for example, you would end up getting a 10x 5-leg parlay. If you had 2 push, you'd end up getting the normal 5x payout, right, for a 4-leg flex, 2.25x, right, for the 3-leg flex, so on and so forth. But much better payouts, right, than you'd get otherwise, right? Like if you just threw in the 5 fades, for example, we'd only get a 5x payout, right? So you get half the payout that you would for somebody pushing on that slip. You'd get a 1x lower, right, for the 4-leg. You'd get, 0.25x lower, right, for the 3-leg fade slip out there. That's why you take the even number props. Now, obviously, if you go 6 for 6 and you make an 8x profit, I guess you're not going to be that pissed off. But do know if you have one push, your payout is going to go up from 8x to 10x, right? So that's why it's a little like, I guess, loophole or a little exploit that you can use over there on Prize Picks. Something that we have to do often when it comes to golf because of these BS correlation rules that they post for the board. So yeah, pretty much. I mean, we'll double check the value on these. I'm assuming pretty much the whole board's too low, right, when it comes to projections. Because if you're going to have 25-mile-an-hour winds out there, it's not going to be easy to play in. So let's double check. We know Kuchar's value. Let's look at Poston, Svenny, and Spawn and see what we're working with. So let's go over to the other tab and do that. Of course, Anthony, best of luck this week with all your exposure. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here. So Poston is at 68.5 and he's juiced under. So maybe we don't take Poston, right? 68 seems like the right projection for JT Poston. And in general, I think he's one of the better players in the field. So let's take him out of there. Let's look at Svenny and JJ Spawn now. So good old JJ Spawn and Svensson. So Spawn, same kind of projection. Okay. So maybe we avoid that one. And then where is Svensson? There he is. Svensson, same thing. Oh, they just really don't like Matt Kuchar, huh? They're just playing the odds like that. I mean, I'm sure we can find other spots that are plus EV. Maybe we do have to take the guys that are up there at 69 strokes. Because, I mean, look at this. They have Jaeger up here. That's the other golf course. So we got to keep in mind, right, some of the odds on here are reflective of the other golf course. Like Eric Cole, for example, right? He's at 69.5 strokes. You'd be like, that's ludicrous, right? He's a much better player than Matt Kuchar. The other golf course is a par 72, right? So if they have him down there at 69.5 strokes, that means that they have him at pretty much, 2.5 under par scoring average. So just worth noting on that end. All right, so this board going to take a little bit to break down. Let's try and find something on Prize Picks to play and then hop on out of here because I need to find some pairings over there for underdog, that's for sure. So over here on the Prize Picks side, I would say our top prop would be this Matt Kuchar over. In terms of another fade, these guys at 68.5 kind of stand out. So like a Chesson Hadley, just off the top of my head, probably a Camilo Villegas. Let's take a look at their odds. So Camilo, we've got at 68.5 and he's even money. And then who was the other one? Chesson Hadley, that's right. He's probably even money too. If they have Camilo even money, he's most likely in that same kind of range, I would have to imagine. But let's double check. Don't have to guess. Chesson Hadley. And they got to have my boy Chesson up there for odds, right? Oh, they don't? It's disappointing. I feel like he's not like a popular player, right? Don't get me wrong, but like he's like top half of popular players for this field. So I don't know. This board just doesn't look that great. Like I like this over on Matt Kuchar, who I think is going to have a decent week, but this golf course is not going to play easy. Like I know we've seen scoring averages, right, of like 1.5, even 3 under par at this golf course. You're just not going to get that when the weather conditions look this shitty. And if you're just tuning in, right, just to make sure that you can see this weather forecast, it's not good, like at all. You've got 25-mile-an-hour wind gusts. You've got rain potentially towards the end of the round. And it's a golf course that's not that easy. You have a lot of water hazards out there. The par threes are exceptionally long. Greens have a lot of contouring to them. And especially the seaside course, when it gets windy out there, it gets especially difficult, right? And the only props we have on Prize Picks and Underdog right now are for the seaside course. So yeah, we had this Matt Kuchar over. I just remembered, right? These green and regulation props are probably the move too. So if we go back and we make this Prize Pick slip together, these unders on greens and regulation have to be the move. Like this golf course, it's not impossible to hit greens, right? It's a really short golf course, but with a 25-mile-an-hour wind, you have a few 200-yard par threes. You know, you're going to make one, maybe two mistakes on the par threes, right? You're going to miss a few of those greens. It gives you 1-2 mistakes to work with the rest of your round, right? I mean, you hit one bad tee shot into a hazard. That's an automatic missed green, right? You have to take a penalty shot most of the time that you miss a fairway around this golf course. Feels like a lot of unders could be the move. So let's take a look at the averages. So the average for greens and regulation at this golf course is 73.7%. Now, keep in mind that this average includes the fringe, so it's likely a higher average than what we're going to have in reality. And last year, that was a 13.2 average. Keep in mind that weather conditions for round one are going to be pretty much as bad as it got all last year, right? Round one played pretty hard last year. I think that's pretty comparable to what we're going to get this time around. Yeah, these green and regulation unders are money. That's for damn sure. So let's see, who can we pair up? So we get through a list in there. I think Alex Smalley is probably the best out of the bunch when it comes to the fades. And in fact, I think we're just going to do this. I'm going to have to, I'm not going to say anything actually. Well, yeah, I'm going to have to get some exposure to that, we'll say, with those four for an under. The payout for a 4-leg flex isn't great. I would actually take this as a power play, and then you hope one of the four kind of pushes, right? Kind of like we were saying with the strokes props before. Maybe you can throw a Kuchar in there too, right? Maybe get a 5-leg flex. Again, you're kind of hoping that one of them pushes, but I think what I would prefer, because these green and regulation props, like they seem egregiously wrong. I mean, hitting 15 greens in a round of golf is hard to do at an easy golf course in easy conditions, let alone when you have these 25-mile-an-hour winds and rain, right, to go out there and deal with. So I think this is the slip we'll go with. These four for an under. And like I said, the payout's not going to look great, but if one of them pushes, this is a 5-leg, 3-leg. Sorry, a 5x 3-leg. Excuse my language. If you have two of them push, let's say, right, two of them get to 14, it'd be a 3x 2-leg, right? Your regular normal 2-leg payout there. So for a normal power play. So I think that's how I would handle the prop board at this point. Kind of like the Eurogolf board. We need to see how the course is playing, right? Round two might even play a little bit harder than what we have in round one. We'll be able to get plenty of data out there in the golf course. I'm not going to be out there for tomorrow's action. I'll be driving up to Georgia. I'm out there for most of the day tomorrow. But yeah, rounds 2 through 4, we will have boots on the ground action. So there in the Patreon, right, I'll be posting everything I see out there in terms of conditions. We'll have the local forecast to work off of. And hopefully with some live bets, right, if we get some like hole scores, like maybe like hole 5 shots, we'll sometimes get like front 9 shots, that kind of thing. I could do a little scouting trip around the golf course and find us a little bit of an edge out there to exploit. So that's all we're going to have for the live stream, guys. I appreciate everyone out there and their support here on the channel. Horschel, I think he's a decent fit. I'm okay with it. Am I surprised Aberg is the favorite? I'm not surprised, Jack. I just don't think it's worth buying in on, right? I think it makes sense, right? He's probably the best player talent-wise in this field. But I think like the question around it, right, is whether it's a good course fit, right? I think that's why a lot of people would scoff at that kind of price. So I'm not surprised, but I'm definitely not a buyer at that price tag. Horschel, right at 40-1. Those are the guys I'm buying this week. I'm 100% with you on that. Like especially like for an outright, Jennifer, when Horschel has his stuff, he's normally pretty sharp, right? I mean, he wins golf tournaments, right, when he has his best stuff. And usually pretty good golf tournaments, like Memorial, Bay Hill, I mean, wins the API, right? Those kind of events. I've seen a lot worse, that's for sure. Any chance Villegas goes back-to-back? There's always a chance, Jack. That's for damn sure. There's always a chance in golf. We saw it with Lucas Glover, right? Went back-to-back after completely finding the putter. I've seen crazier things happen. And honestly, Jack, it couldn't happen to a better guy. The guy is one of the better personalities, one of the better people out there on the PGA Tour. My family, my mom specifically, runs Children's Hospital down here in South Florida that does a lot of work with Camilo. It's where his daughter was staying for a lot of her treatments and whatnot. So I have quite a bit of Camilo memorabilia. In fact, something that's coming in the mail this week that I'm going to have put there in the back that is from the Bermuda Championship. So that's pretty cool. It's something that actually he like thought to send out to the hospital, and then they sent it to me. So that's pretty cool. But just a great dude in general. Like I've heard great things about him. I've never gotten to meet him personally or anything like that. But Jack, if it's going to happen to anybody, I hope it's him. Let's say that much. Now, would I bet on it? Would I like advise playing him this week? Probably not. Just for full transparency, I probably wouldn't recommend that. But I'll definitely be rooting for him. Let's say that much. I had 0% in DFS last week. I had no exposure when it came to outrights. And I was living and dying on every shot of his last week like it was Jordan Spieth. He's just that kind of guy, easy to root for. So, all right, that's all I've got for the live stream, guys. Hopefully you found this helpful and ready to go out there and build your lineups. Hit that like button on the way out of here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And let's go out there and have ourselves a great end to this fall swing.